to try to jump it again?
Yeah, with different cables.
Flooded it. It's stalled out?
Yes.
How you feel right now?
Like we need a new battery. Today I'm going to be replacing the alternator and the battery on our old Ford 3000. We've been jump starting this for over a year, which means the battery hasn't been holding a charge, eventually the battery was starting to take forever just to get a charge. It wouldn't get up to 100%, and if we tried to crank it over, the battery would lose its charge, which is a pretty good sign of a bad battery. The problem is when you run something off of a bad battery for a long period of time, you're actually running it off of the alternator. The alternator in this tractor was pretty old to begin with. We killed the alternator and the battery simultaneously. We were jump starting it. Every time we took off the jumper cables, it would shut off and hook them back up, and it would start back up again. It was kind of funny. This tractor, so the Fords originally had a 6 volt alternator. This tractor has been modified to a 12 volt. The alternator is still going to go on the side here. We've got our belt right here. The tensioner arm is up here. I've already taken this off because I wanted to have the alternator tested before I made the decision to replace it. It failed, so now we're putting a new one on. The only thing I could tell when they did the 12 volt conversion is they straight wired it to the ignition and to the battery and on. I don't know if that was done correctly or not. I do know that the tractor has run for a long period of time with this setup, and whoever did it probably knows a little more about mechanics than I do. I'm going to just go ahead and put it back the way it was. So to get the battery off, you need to release your tension arm, which is this right here, and once that's loose, this will move back and forth, and the alternator attaches at the top. As I put the new one on, you'll see that'll allow you to kind of release the tension of the belt. The next thing you're going to do is remove your wires, of course, from the alternator, and then this basically has a long bolt that'll slide through the alternator. Mine has a spacer in here because it's using a more modern alternator, so the spacer kind of helps hold the alternator into place. This bolt could be a little bit of a pain in the butt to move in and out, at least on mine. I'm sure it's not on everybody's that way. I've got my dog controller here. They keep getting into an area they're not supposed to get into. Now, we just matched the numbers pretty much on the old alternator for this new alternator. So my hookups and everything on this one are very much the same as they were on the old one. You can see we've got 2 spaces for bolts this top space is where our tension bar goes, and this bottom spacer is where we slide the old bolt through. So this is a fairly easy thing to accomplish. Now this is where it's going to be a little tricky. I've got to kind of crank this into place. This would have been a lot easier to do with that oil filter off. The oil filter is getting in my way from mounting this thing on there. But I've pretty much got a bolt with a washer that goes on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and stick that on, and I'm going to use that to help pull this tight. If I can get it on there. I just noticed something that's going to be a bit of a problem. Maybe it won't. No, it's definitely going to be a problem. My fan is going to be hitting that. Maybe if I get it just into the right spot. I have a feeling it's going to hit. It's not going to spin. Okay, so I am back. What we ended up doing was I went back to the shop and we took off the old alternator fan and put it on this alternator. After we did that, it was scraping, so we had to add another washer into there. But that basically should fix our problem here. So I'm going to try and go ahead and install this thing. If this doesn't work, I'm just going to have to try something else. And that's spinning the way it's supposed to. See, this before, when I was trying to spin it, kept rubbing on that piece down there, and now that we've made those adjustments, it spins just fine. So if you are converting an old tractor from a 6 volt to a 12 volt, what we are using here is a DriveWorks 7127 3AV, and well, that's what it says there. On the alternator it says 617-44194. So those are numbers that ought to help you out if you're thinking about making the switch. I will say it's a little better operating off of a 12 amp alternator than a 6 amp, but as you can tell, there are challenges with fitting an alternator in here. It looks like they just used some copper tubing in here as my spacer. I actually think that spacer isn't going to be wide enough. Maybe I can get it tight and pull it or something. I think that'll be good enough once I get the tension bar back on here. Oh, this is fun. I've got this thing all sorts of off. So I've got to go. I've also noticed that the belt doesn't line up perfectly with all this. It's pretty close, but not exactly where I would want it to be. That's going to be fun. This piece isn't quite lining up either. I ought to be able to spin that around. So right now, my issue here is that this tension arm, I'd really like it around on the other side. It looks like this tension arm was bent at one point anyway. If I could get it off, I should be able to just flip it. Then it would bend out too far. I guess I'm just going to have to try and work with it the way it is. New alternator, a few minor adjustments to how it's installed. No big deal. You'll notice this doesn't ratchet anymore. If I could find my good ratchet, that would solve a lot of time issues here. Of course, I seem to lose a lot of tools lately. Before I tighten that completely down, go ahead and loosen it. Want as much tension on this belt as I can get. You gotta love these old tensioner systems. They just don't work. This is when having the right tool would really be beneficial. Still got a lot of play. Got a solution for that too. Cannot figure out why I can't get that thing. Give myself a little more play maybe. I guess that's just part of this, is how this is connected here. Not getting it as tight as I want it. In order to come in from this direction, see, now that's going to hit the fan. There ain't no way to win. What's interesting about this is I believe that this is actually on upside down to begin with. That still wouldn't work the other way. Now, if I tried it like this, it's still gonna hit. I might be able to clear this. Barely. I guess we'll try it and see what happens. Put this bad boy on out here. Pull that out as far as we can get it. Now I've got a tight belt. Somebody had, it looks like at one point in time, either cut that up or an alternator cut it up. So somebody had it on the direction that I'm putting it on. It also looks like it may have been bent a little bit in the past, probably to fit the last alternator. So I've got that out nice and tight. Go ahead and tighten this bad boy up down here. And the big thing will be when we start this up. That's when we're going to get to see whether or not we have the fans hitting this thing. It looks to me like we're barely going to clear it. But I got a nice tight belt, which is probably the most important thing to me right now. A lot of things are just in a different place on this alternator. But I guess that is the fun of working with modified things like old tractors that somebody else has already converted. Everything else made to really fit it right. It's plugged in, good tight belt. Let's go put the battery on and try and start it up, and we'll see how this flies when we start it up. Now, this is a significantly smaller battery than we had before. Actually okay with that. My perspective, a smaller battery just means that I've got a little extra space here for tools or whatnot. So I'm perfectly fine with the extra space that this battery gives me. I'm going to tighten the negative down. My positive is broken off. The battery that we put in here is a CarQuest Gold, 700 cold cranking amps, 875 cranking amps above 32 degrees. This is the battery. It's part number 246 CarQuest Gold. This is the battery that our mechanic thought would be good for the tractor. So we had a commercial battery in here. It didn't have as much firing power, but the commercial battery came all the way down to there. So it's definitely a lighter weight battery. And what I like about this battery is that it will fit and probably work in our Ford CL340, which I'm working on right now. So I don't have to run to the store and buy another battery. I could just pull this one and move it over to the other one. You could tell that I've had some power issues with this tractor, because look at that. That thing kind of just overheated and broke off. This side's still okay, but I've had power issues with it from the beginning. If you had a 6 amp, this would be your voltage rectifier, and obviously we don't use this for anything because the way that they have that alternator down there pretty much runs down and connects in with the power down here and the ignition switch. So there's nothing fancy in the wiring of this tractor. It's pretty straightforward and it works. If you didn't see it, we did a video on replacing the starter solenoid. I also did a video making some repairs to our carburetor down here. The carburetor still leaks a little bit. I probably need to get some new gaskets for this. It runs, that's the most important part. So as I start this thing up, I want you to watch that and let me know if it scrapes. Okay, so now we've successfully changed our oil. We've got a new battery, new alternator in place. This alternator just barely clears the tension bar here, but the fan on these alternators is necessary because it keeps the alternator from overheating. So you can't really take the fan off, but overall I think this setup works pretty well. This is, again, it was originally a 6-volt alternator, so the original alternator for this Ford would have looked a lot different than this. When I was reading off numbers before, this is a Delco Remy. The part number that I read is correct. It's a Delco Remy. I think the other sticker on there was just from the car parts place where it came from. So that's all I've got for you today. Stay tuned. We've got a lot of farm mechanic videos coming up. We're working on our Ford CL340, which is a skid steer with a Wisconsin VH4D engine. Very common engine. You'll probably find that in a lot of different things. So we're going to be cranking that engine up after sitting for a couple years. It should be an interesting video. We've also got a Kawasaki Bayu 4-wheeler that's also been sitting for over a year, and we'll be cranking that one back up and making some repairs to that. So lots of fun coming up as far as getting equipment ready. This is February. I know it looks like spring, but we're in North Carolina, so some days it's freezing, some days it's summertime here. with the nicer weather, we have a lot of projects that we need to complete. I usually spend this time of year trying to get our equipment running and operating, and it generally will operate through the rest of the year, and then this time next year I'll be doing the same thing again.